日本に住んでいる外国人は日本のことどう思っているんでしょうか。皆さんこんにちは。IU-Connect の朝です。今日の動画では友達のチャーリーと僕との会話をご紹介したいと思います。Charlie is one of my friends who lives in Japan. He's from England. He's been here for about 5 years doing entrepreneur work as well as being an English teacher. And in this conversation, we talked about a lot of interesting things. We talked about his experience living in Fukuoka, Nagoya, and Tokyo, and which one he likes the most. We also talked about his experience being an English teacher and what he thinks about Japanese English education. There's a lot of really great stuff in this interview, so please listen to it. Because we're speaking native to native, it's a little fast and you may not hear everything, but that's okay. Don't worry. The more you listen to this, the more you'll get used to it. So please listen to this maybe 2 or 3 times. If you want to listen to this conversation again, I recommend you listen to it on my podcast. It's like a downloadable radio show. That way, you can listen to this conversation again while you're driving or cooking or doing something else. じゃあ早速始めましょう。
So tell me, Charlie, where are you from?
I'm from England, the UK.
And how long have you been in Japan now?
Now it's going to be, it's almost 5.5 years.
How did you first find out about what Japan was or as a country?
That's kind of a tough question, I guess, because I kind of grew up with an interest in Japan, just kind of a broad. I didn't really understand much about it, but I read some books about like Oda Nobunaga and like Sengoku Jidai and things like that. I thought was so interesting, like Japanese history.
Okay.
But then I also when I was a teenager, I kind of played some video games. I liked the Japanese ones, I like, of course, like Mario and Final Fantasy and things like that.
Okay.
So I had this kind of idea of what I thought Japan was like, and then at my university they had a talk on the JET program.
Okay.
And I thought, okay, that would be so cool. I could go to Japan and I could teach. And I actually didn't get in, but it did give me an idea that I could just move to Japan if I wanted to. So I kind of started thinking about it then. And then in 2012, I moved to Japan.
Were the history stories first or were the video games first?
Probably the video games first.
Yeah. How did you get into that history? Like, how did you know about that?
I don't know. It's kind of weird because I always liked the Japanese style games or like games about Japan. So I played a lot of those. I could give examples, but I don't think people would know what they were.
About it. It's fine.
But because I was interested in those, some of them had kind of political elements to them, or just things about history of Japan that were just really interesting to me.
Yeah, it was similar with me. I learned Japanese language, and then I looked into history and I learned about samurai and history, and I thought that was all really cool. And so actually around the time I started learning Japanese, I was totally into the histories, and I knew more about Japanese history than my Japanese friends.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Before you came to Japan, what was your image of what Japan was going to be like?
It's hard to remember because it's so different from what I now know about Japan from living here. I remember talking to my because my sister also lived in Switzerland for a year, and so I remember talking to her about kind of being an expat and being moving to another country and living in another country, and I remember saying like, oh yeah, it's so cool in Japan, like they look after their employees and so people can like keep their job for a long time and feel safe and all that stuff. And my sister said like, you're reading a lot about Japan and that's great because you're going to move there, but remember that actually living in a country, living there is a completely different experience. So don't go there thinking that it's going to be like it is in your imagination, because it's really not. And I remember taking that with me and then and thinking like, okay, well, she probably knows what she's talking about, right? Because she's lived in another country and she probably went to Switzerland going like, oh, it's going to be amazing. And it's such a beautiful place. Because she lived in Lausanne, which was a beautiful place. So, but she still, realized that once you live somewhere, you get a different idea of what it's like.
What was your kikkake, your reason for coming to Japan? You wanted to do JET, you didn't get in. So how did you first come here?
Well, I didn't get into, like I said, I didn't get into the JET program, and they only have applications once per year.
Okay.
So I missed the November, like the second time around, I missed the November cutoff, and I thought, oh, okay, so am I supposed to wait until next November? And the process takes 6-7 months. So you don't come to Japan until the following year, August. So I don't really want to wait a year and a half to go to Japan. I want to do this now. Like I'm ready. So I started looking around online and trying to find out like where I could get jobs and looking at companies that hire a lot of people. You know, there are a lot of different kind of companies like Interac and ECC and Eon and Nova and basically a lot of Eikaiwa companies that were hiring people. So I picked one and did the interview process and came to Japan in July.
Okay, as an English teacher.
As an English teacher, yeah.
Okay, cool. So when you first came to Japan, where did you go?
So I landed in Nagoya. Actually, my flight went to Nagoya because that was where my company was, their headquarters were based and where they did their training. And the first few days were in Nagoya, and then I went to Osaka for the rest of my training. And my schools were placed in Fukuoka, so that's where I moved to in the end. So you
went to Fukuoka?
Yeah, so from September I lived in Fukuoka for like 10 months.
What was Fukuoka like?
Fukuoka is really, really different from Tokyo because I now live in Tokyo, and I've lived in Tokyo the longest of any place I've lived in Japan. There's definitely, and this is something that I think Japanese people are very aware of too, is that every place in Japan has its own kind of culture. And has like the people have their own kind of way of being. So in Fukuoka, people are so chill.
Yeah,
so chill, really, really laid back compared to people in Tokyo. I guess because the closer you come to Tokyo, the more like businessy and the more because Tokyo is such a huge city. There's so much to do, but there's also a lot of business and work here. So yeah, they're really, really chill people.
And so, was there anything when you went to Fukuoka that surprised you that you were not expecting?
I think one of the things that surprised me early on was that chocolate is seasonal in Japan, which I've never experienced. In England, you can get just all the chocolate all year round. But in Japan, I was just really surprised because I came to Japan and I was trying all these new delicious foods, and I love the food in Japan, but I'm also kind of a chocoholic.
Okay.
So, and there were these really amazing like chocolate caramel things that I think it was like Meiji or Morinaga or something. And I was buying them like every day. I loved them so much. And then they just stopped doing them when it came to autumn. And I was like, what happened? And they're like, oh, well, it's like a caramel thing that they only have, or like mint chocolate as well. It's like a summer thing for some reason, like mint chocolate ice cream. It's like, but I love mint chocolate ice cream. Like, why is this disappearing? I was so confused because I was like, but it's chocolate. It's not like vegetables or something that only grow in summer. I was very confused.
Yeah, that's something I thought was interesting too, is just like how everything changes according to the seasons. And one thing that I feel is I really like about Japan is Tokyo maybe is a little bit different, but the connectedness with nature and like going in those cycles. Whereas I feel like in the United States, at least, we're totally separate. We have all foods, all seasons, all times. Whereas here, things really change, you know? Do you remember what your first day in Japan was like?
Yeah, I remember.
Okay.
So I remember landing at the airport because I came, I think my flight left the UK on the 15th of August and arrived in Japan on the 16th.
Okay.
And I remember walking out of the airport and it being so humid. I've never experienced, I don't think I've ever experienced humidity like that in my whole life. Because in Europe, it's, I mean, maybe in the south of Italy or something, it's like that, but not in England. And it was so surprising.
Yeah, you know, that was the same thing for me too, because I came to Japan both times in July or August. Yeah. And I just remember coming and being like, oh, I'm going to die because it's so hot, you know? Yeah. And Boston too. I think Boston is really similar to England. Maybe we have more sunny days. I don't know. But yeah, it's much more cooler and the winter gets very cold. You know?
And it was really surprising actually because I didn't speak a word of Japanese when I came to Japan. I couldn't speak anything. So there was someone from my company that came to the airport and picked me up and drove me back to the office, got all my stuff and just kind of left me in the company's like rented apartment room. And I was like, okay, I'm really hungry. I need to go eat something. I don't know. I'd been like studying hiragana and katakana on the plane, and I didn't know how to read any of the menus. I went to a supermarket and I just started looking at things, and the supermarket's completely different here too. Like all of the labels were all in Japanese. I couldn't figure out what half the things were, and so I was trying to figure out something. And then I remember I knocked a glass bottle of something on the floor in a supermarket my first day in Japan, and I was like, oh, I don't know what to do. And I went to the guy and I was like, I don't know what to say. I had no words. I didn't know how to say anything. Just like sumimasen. Like I knew sumimasen because I learned that. That's an important one. I was like sumimasen, and I was like, just that thing on the floor, and I like pointed to the floor, and he's like, daijoubu or something, and I knew what daijoubu meant, and I was like, oh, okay, thank God, like I'm not in trouble on my first day, like for breaking things in a supermarket.
Okay. That is a wonderful first day experience.
I felt really like, oh my God, I'm such an embarrassment to my country.
Yeah. But now I hope you're not breaking things every day in the supermarket nowadays.
No.
Okay. You learn not to break glass bottles.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the important thing. So you came here as an English teacher, and so how long did you spend in Fukuoka?
About 10 months, I think, nearly a year.
Okay. And then how long in Nagoya?
So I moved to Nagoya, I think, in May. And I was in Nagoya for 2 years. So I had 2 1 year long contracts.
Okay. Tokyo is about 3 years, 2.5 years.
Tokyo, nearly 3 years now.
I would really like to know, because I've never been to Fukuoka. I've only been to Nagoya for a day. What is something you really like about Tokyo in comparison to those other places you've been? And what's something that you don't like about Tokyo in comparison to those places?
One of the things I really like about Tokyo is that it's really connected.
Yeah.
It's so easy to meet new people, to go and find something interesting. Like any day you can just... we actually used to do this. My girlfriend and I, we would pick a station in Tokyo and just explore it.
Oh,
and
cool.
there's so many stations. You could do that every weekend for like 5 years and you'd never go through all of them. So we'd just pick one, and that's how we found out about Shimokitazawa and how cool that whole area is.
Yeah.
We just... okay, well, let's go to this station because, you know, there's a coffee shop near there that's interesting. And so we, that's what we did. And I just love that it's so easy. And you can actually walk around most of Tokyo.
Yeah.
Tokyo's a surprisingly walkable city because it's such a big city, but you can kind of compare them. Because I grew up in England, we call it the home counties, but it's outside London. Basically all the counties that are outside London. So if you imagine London, the city would be like Tokyo, like Nijusanku.
Yeah.
I grew up in one of the places just outside Nijusanku.
Okay.
And so it was about 35 minutes by train to go to London King's Cross.
Okay.
It was very countryside. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to explain. I feel like a countryside boy. Like I grew up in the country, but it was so close to the city. It was always easy for me to go into London and do stuff with my friends.
So you kind of lived in the Musashinoshi of
right.
Yeah. For a while, you were doing English teaching in Japan.
Yeah.
How did that go, honestly?
I love teaching. I absolutely love teaching. I've taught every level of school. I've taught from kindergarten, which I think is probably my number one, like most experience in teaching in kindergarten, all the way up to high school, and I've even taught like university students too. And it's, I don't know, I just absolutely love teaching people, just giving them something that they didn't have before, and especially like making a connection with them. And I feel like, especially as an English teacher, my job isn't so much to give them English knowledge, because they can get that from a textbook, they can get that from watching TV. There's so many different ways you can learn about English, but really it's to inspire them. I feel like as a person from another country, like my job is to inspire these kids to enjoy learning English. And so I spend a lot of time trying to find ways, and also like in the class as well, trying to get the kids to like me, because if they don't like me, then I'm like the only English speaking person they've ever met, maybe, or like for some of them, I'm the first English speaking person they've met, especially when I was teaching kindergarten. So if they don't like me, then they're like, oh, I know one guy who speaks English and I don't like him, so I'm not going to learn English, right?
Yeah.
So I put a lot of effort into making my classes fun, and to having a real relationship with the students, and being able to, you know, talk to them about their lives, and I think that makes a huge difference. Like connecting with them is like the number one thing that's going to help them to learn.
So you like teaching Japanese people, but what is it like teaching in Japan in the system?
So I've taught like eikaiwa, and I've also taught in public schools too. In Nagoya, I taught in a public junior high school. There was kind of an inner city school, and at the time I was told it's like a Yankee school, which I didn't understand what that meant. Yankee school. But it was tough. There were a lot of kids, like I'd never experienced this, because education in Japan and in England are very different. But there were kids like sleeping through the classes, and not like from the first day. It wasn't even like I was a really terrible teacher and they got really bored. They just had their head down on the table like every day. And it was really confusing for me to see that. And I asked other kids about it, and I wanted to find out like why. And I asked some of the kids who could speak English, some of them could speak English reasonably well. And I was like, why are these like so many of these kids like sleeping or like not paying attention, or like do they care about this at all? And some of those kids, like it taught me a lot to think about their situation, because some the other students told me like, oh, actually he works in his parents' udon shop every night, so he goes home and he has to work in the udon shop until 1 o'clock to help serve all the salarymen. So for him it's about survival. It's like every day he's working. And so coming to school, it's like, well, that's not going to help feed my family like right now. So the kids were going home and helping their parents in their shop. It really surprised me. I'd never heard of that kind of thing before. So
how do you feel the English education institution in Japan is like?
It's difficult. Just all of my experience and from the kind of work that I do, I don't think it works very well at all. I think it's so focused on teaching for a test and trying to prove a certain level of English communication that it makes it really hard for people to actually enjoy it, or to find any way to actually communicate through it and to find some real value in English learning. And especially at junior high school and high school level, I think there's the kids that love English and the kids that hate English. And usually it's not because of the actual language itself. It's because some kids just, a lot of kids don't like being tested constantly on something like, oh yeah, learn all of these words. Like that's not going to help anybody to speak at all.
Yeah, right. So in your mind, right, because you've gone to different schools and you've been in different situations. If you could change the way English is taught in Japan, how would you change it and why?
Good question. So I've actually thought about this a lot, because I've been wanting to start my own school for a while, and I've been putting stuff in motion to do that. But my first impression is that if you have a test that tests listening and it tests writing, which are two of the 4 skills of language, but it doesn't test speaking, then no one's going to learn to speak because it's not being tested. So don't be surprised if you're teaching everyone to do listening and writing and reading and you're not teaching them to speak. Don't be surprised if they can't speak. So I would focus on communication. That's how we learn as children, right? When you're a baby, your mother doesn't go like, okay, learn all of these words, because if you haven't got a grasp of all these words by next week, you'll fail the speaking test with your father. Like that's not how kids learn language. That's not how babies learn language. They speak as they become more prepared, and they learn that by listening and having a relationship. You learn English, or you learn Japanese, or you learn whatever your mother tongue is. They call it mother tongue because you learn it from your mother, and it's usually because you love your mother. You have a relationship with that person. If you're just learning it through textbooks and through tests and through activities in school, like we'd play games and stuff with the kids in the schools, it's still not enough. You need to have a meaningful relationship with the person you're learning from, and you need to use the language and listen to the language and get a real feeling for it, rather than just learn all of these words because you'll be tested.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I never thought about the relationship aspect of learning to communicate with someone you care about. That gives you a reason to want to communicate. It's like you don't want to communicate with someone you don't like or someone you don't know, but someone you care about that you want to communicate with. You'll communicate with them.
Absolutely. And I learned that the most, I think, when I was teaching at an international preschool in Nagoya. So it's the year after I was teaching junior high school. And the students I was teaching, I was teaching the same kids every day for 6 hours a day. And by the end of the year, all of them were basically fluent in English.
Wow.
They could all speak English very well. And some of them sounded like native kids. They were saying things that, and they were like just incredibly amazing kids. And all of them were Japanese, except for one who was like half Japanese and half Russian. And they were all, that kid, interesting. He's speaking Japanese and Russian at home and then English in his school, but there's 3 languages in the head of a 3-year-old. So, but yeah, like they were all just speaking English all day long, and they got used to it because they liked me and because we spent so much time together and we enjoyed our time together. So of course they wanted to learn English to speak to me, to speak to their friends. Like, it was it's a good way of learning language.
Yeah, actually, that reminds me of a study that I read, because I studied second language acquisition in university, and they looked at Russian immigrants to Canada and they were all about 14, 15 years old. And they looked and some of the people could speak fluent, like native level English, and others still had a very thick Russian accent and couldn't speak that well. And they were trying to figure out why, because they both went to the public school system. And the key was what they did after school. They found out that the people who attended the Russian cultural events and used Russian at home had a very thick accent, whereas the people who decided to leave that and not go to those cultural events and just try to become Canadian, they ended up speaking really well. And you end up, like, I actually also learned in sociolinguistics that we tend to imitate and talk like people we like. So if they like you, they're going to talk to you. And that's probably one of the reasons why they were using English so well, you know, because they liked you. And so naturally they just talked like you. So Charlie, are you learning Japanese right now?
Yes, I've kind of, I had a kind of a dip in my language learning for a while, but I've been learning again recently.
Okay. Why did you have this new desire to start learning Japanese seriously again?
A big part of it, I think, is that I'm starting my own business in Japan, and I've been doing my own business for the last few years as a freelancer, and I'm trying to really push to start that. And I realized now, a little bit too late, but better late than never. I realized that I really need Japanese. So at the time, like before, when I was teaching English, I never really needed Japanese. That's why a lot of foreigners in Japan don't learn Japanese, because most of them, or I would say, yeah, that's perfectly fine to say, most of them are English teachers. So they go to school, they teach English all day. Their job is to speak English, and all of the people around them speak English to them, and a lot of Japanese people speak English to them too. So they go like, okay, well, as long as I can order food and just get by on a day-to-day basis, I don't really need any more.
Right.
And I kind of felt similar, but I did go to classes and I did get to a reasonably conversational level. I had a girlfriend for a while in Nagoya who didn't speak any English.
Okay.
So my Japanese got pretty good. I'd say I was reasonably conversational in Japanese, but it kind of got worse when I moved to Tokyo with my current girlfriend, and she speaks really good English, so we can communicate in English all day. And I just kind of got into the habit of just using Japanese for occasional one-word things like, oh, that's chotto mendokusai ne, that kind of thing. And that wasn't very good for my Japanese, so I've really been working hard to pick it up recently.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't feel the need for it, you're not going to do it. And that's, I actually found for a time period, my Japanese was getting worse when I was here because I was doing the English teacher thing and I was using English all the time. What is something that's really difficult for you learning Japanese?
I think the hardest thing really is, and this is something I would highly recommend you think about a little bit, is that when you're talking to a person from another culture, the language you start communicating in is often the language that you will stick to.
Yeah.
So I've got plenty of Japanese friends, but many of them my Japanese isn't as good as their English, so we speak in English because it's easier, and then your relationship becomes a relationship in English. You know all this stuff about each other because you've learned it in English. And then it's like, okay, well, this is the language we communicate in. So I've got a lot of Japanese friends who I only really speak to them in English, even though they're Japanese and I want to learn Japanese. It's just that's our dynamic, right? And that's quite a hard thing to break. And so it's good if you can find if the kind of people that you talk to or the kind of friends that you talk to, either they don't speak Japanese at all and have no interest in learning, or the other way around as well. For me, is if I can find Japanese people who don't really care that much about learning English and are perfectly happy to speak to me in Japanese. It's a good way to get a friend who's going to help you learn the language better.
Yeah, it goes back to what you were talking about, relationships. It's like, what language is your relationship in? That's really interesting. I never thought about it that way. That's cool. So though, that a lot of people want to connect with you. I mean, I'm sure you know this, but like a lot of people, Japanese people studying English, when they see a foreigner, they want to talk with them. They want to connect with them. A lot of times they want to practice English too, but they feel really scared. They feel like there's a block with them. One of the biggest fears is, if I make a mistake, they're going to hate me or they're not going to like me very much. So when someone tries to talk to you in English and it's not going very well, how does that make you feel, honestly?
I used to get a little bit not bothered by it, but when I was studying Japanese, especially, it kind of it made me think like, can we just speak in Japanese because my Japanese is better than your English? And I felt bad that way. But then I thought about this a lot more recently, as a kind of philosophical thing, is that when people, if they're putting a lot of effort to try and speak to me in English in the language they think I speak, and they're trying to communicate with me on my level, and because I've come to expect it, I don't mind it at all, and I think it's something that some people, some foreigners, if they don't want to do that, then they're probably not the kind of people you want to be friends with, right? I've seen people who get like, oh my God, I went to this shop and they started speaking to me in English. Like, they don't know I speak English and I want to speak Japanese, and how could they speak to me this way? And they get kind of almost offended, but those are the kind of people you don't want to talk to, and they're in the massive minority. Like, I mean, that's a weird way of saying that. They're in a tiny minority. Yeah. A tiny minority of people will get upset about it, and those people they're not worth talking to. Most foreigners in Japan, and a lot of my friends too, completely accepting of people speaking to them in English and actually encourage them quite a lot.
Yeah, it was the same thing for me too. When I was studying, I was thinking, I'm here to learn Japanese. Yeah, right. Why are you speaking to me in English? But then I realized, well, I'm being a selfish jerk. Yeah. Like they're actually trying to help me. That's wonderful, And I realized, like, as I gain more confidence and happiness in my life, that stuff bothers me less. Yeah. Unfortunately, I feel like a lot of foreigners who come to Japan, especially from America, I don't know about the UK, they tend to be people who are lacking in self-confidence, lacking in self-worth, because they're into anime, manga, and they can't really make friends in America, so they come to Japan. And those people really get offended. And I remember people actually talking to me and saying, wow, Arthur, I'm really happy you're normal. Like, people said that to me a few times because I don't like anime, I don't like manga, and it's
kind of a stereotype, right?
Yeah, but it's a true stereotype for Americans, for sure. Like, I remember I went to Aogaku for a year, right? Aoyama Gakuin Daigaku, and we had ryugakusei from all these different countries, and I kid you not, like, all the American students were like so weird. Yeah. Like, I can understand why they came here. And it made me feel really bad because I'm like, come on, guys. Like, I don't know. I don't know how to verbalize it. But anyways, people want to talk to you. And if they talk to you in strange English, you don't really care that much. They're trying.
Yeah. And I appreciate that effort.
Right.
I appreciate that effort.
Yeah. And so if people wanted to connect with you or someone like you, what kind of advice would you give to them?
I've met most of my Japanese friends, like long-term friends, people that I actually still keep in contact with, and people that I hang out with. I met most of them through Meetup.com.
Okay.
And I actually started a Meetup group in Nagoya of my own. That's where I met my girlfriend. I made a language exchange Meetup that was, free and open, and like tons of people came along. I actually really loved that group. It was a really great group of people because there were Japanese people and English people. And actually, two of my friends, a guy from India and a Korean Japanese lady, got married. They met at my group and they got married. Wow! And they live in India now. Like,
look at that.
I was so excited. I was so happy that happened. It was just like, oh my God! Like my group changed people's lives, Yeah. And but it changed a lot of people's lives. A lot of those people I still keep in touch with to this day, and it was just a very good experience. And I think Meetup is because it takes it offline. Like, so many people, they want to find some way to, like, we have this term in the West called growth hacking. Growth hacking. The term? And it's like, the idea is like, instead of doing things the hard way, you find an easy shortcut. You know, like, one example is for learning languages. People use these applications like Memrise or Duolingo or Anki or something. And I see them on the train all the time, like, especially foreigners on the train, like, looking at kanji and like, okay, it says this, and like, what's the meaning? And it's like a multiple choice answer thing. And it's like, that's not going to help you to connect with people. That's just like a thing that makes you feel like you're doing something, but it doesn't really help you very much, and actually can push you further away from your actual goal, which is to meet people. Yeah. So, like, go out and meet people, and Meetup is a great way to do that because it takes it all offline. You go to a cafe, and it's a little bit nerve-wracking at first. Right. For me, especially, like, when I was an organizer, like, people would come along, and they'd talk to me and be like, "Oh, you're the organizer. Oh, thank you so much." I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's so crap. I'm sorry, everything's so rubbish and we're so disorganized." And they'd be like, "That's fine. Like, just chill." But it was actually a really great experience to have that and to meet so many people that way.
Yeah, in your case, right? You went out and you made that situation to connect with people. I mean, so a lot of English learners, they can go to meetup.com to opportunities already there, but they can also make their own too. I mean, probably recommend them going to a meetup.com event first. But yeah, I mean, just like you, they don't have to wait for an English teacher to come and talk to them. They can make their own situation, their own opportunities to talk to people. And there's plenty of opportunities at meetup.com.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And it's actually a much better way, I think, of learning the language than doing something like man-to-man lessons or doing classes. Because I took classes. There was another great opportunity, actually, maybe for Japanese people. I think this would be great too. To make friends is the volunteer language classes at the local ward office. Okay. So that's how I started learning Japanese and how I made a lot of Japanese friends. I still hang out with some of them too.
Oh, cool.
So like they have just check your local ward office. There are volunteer language classes that you can teach people Japanese, but then you can just be like friends with them as well and speak to them in English outside of the class or something. And I met a lot of cool people there too.
That's great. I never thought about that.
It's weird, right? Because the reason I went was because I was asking friends, like, how do I learn Japanese? Like, these classes are so expensive and you have to like sign up for, a long course, 3-month course or something, and it would cost huge amounts of money, right? But the volunteer classes are super cheap because it's volunteers. So that's the reason I went along. And actually quite a lot of really cool people and very interesting people went along to the volunteer language classes too.
So for a final question, I want to hear from you. What is something that you really like about Japan that keeps you here?
Oh, man. That's a really good question because there's so many things I love about Japan.
Just list them. Go for it.
Okay. Everyone says this, but the food is so amazing. I love Japanese food. I love how safe it is here. It's incredibly safe. I feel safe everywhere I go, whereas in some parts of London, I don't feel completely safe. The transport system is so amazing. I don't need to have a car here, whereas in England, I lived in the countryside. I needed a car because there's so poor connections everywhere. But in Japan, you can go anywhere by train. Yeah. People are so friendly and so helpful. It still surprises me sometimes, like how far people go out of their way to be helpful and polite and courteous to each other. It's like a really hospitable country. I mean, if I had to pick one, it would be the food, sushi, especially. Oh my God, I can't live without sushi. Yeah. And you can't really eat it outside of Japan. Yeah. You can't really find real Japanese food outside Japan unless you pay huge amounts of money. Finding sushi in England, it's like they have a lot of sushi chains. It's becoming popular, but it's just nothing like the quality of Japan. Even like nothing like as good as the quality of like a sushiro or kappa sushi. Like that's better than most of the things you can find in the UK.
Yeah, I agree with you. I can't eat sushi in America anymore. All right, well, Charlie, it was great talking with you. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, great talking with you too. Thank you so much.
So, how was the conversation with Charlie? I hope you enjoyed listening to a new way of looking at Japan from a different point of view. And if you want to not just study English, watch YouTube videos, and listen to podcasts, but actually talk with foreigners like Charlie in the real world, please download my free guide. In this guide, you're going to learn the 2 steps you need to not just learn English, but actually use it to talk with foreigners in the real world. No more endless English study. To get access to this guide, you can click up here or you can click the link in the description box below. Now, I have a question for you. I want to be interviewing a lot of foreigners who live in Japan. What kind of questions do you want me to ask them? Please leave a comment in the comment box below. Until next time, enjoy your English adventures. 一緒に世界とつながりましょう!